I thought there was going to be, sorry. Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Katherine Lowe. I'm with the Center for Digital Trust. C4DT is focused on digital trust and trust-building technologies in cybersecurity, data, privacy and protection, and responsible AI. The center is EPFL's interface between its research labs and the external actors from the private and public spheres. So in this session today, transparency and AI. Well, you know, every day in the news it seems like we are reading another news story about another new AI application that is changing the way that we do things in the world, from hiring decisions to medical diagnoses, chat GPT and LLMs, and to deciding where to bomb a place. So, you know, we need to have trust in the decisions that AI systems make, and in order to build trust, we need to have transparency in AI. But that's complicated, right? It's a very complicated, complex situation. And so the objective for this session today is to maybe share some developments in transparency in AI. You know, what does it mean for AI to be transparent? You know, how far are we actually from attaining transparency? And what level of transparency, maybe on a more like kind of existential level, what level of transparency do we accept? And what risks are we taking by accepting that level of transparency? So let me introduce to you our panelists. I have it written down here so I don't mess it up. Martin Jaggi is an associate professor at EPFL. He heads the Machine Learning and Optimization Lab. His research group publishes regularly in top venues in machine learning. Before joining EPFL, he did his postdoc research at ETH Zurich, at the Simons Institute in Berkeley, and at École Polytechnique in Paris. He earned his PhD in machine learning and optimization from ETHZ in 2011, as well as a Master's of Science in math there. He's a co-founder of EPFL's Applied Machine Learning Days and is a fellow of the European ELIS network. Next, we have Laura Tocmacov, and she specializes in the ethics of AI and their integration into the world of work. Trained at MIT in AI and business strategy and at Mila, Quebec's Institute of AI in responsible AI and human rights, Laura has been working for more than 20 years in the field of transition and employability. Laura heads the ImpactAI Foundation, which she co-founded 7 years ago with the vision of aligning AI with humanist values and fundamental rights. And last but not least, we have Hamilton Mann. He is the Group VP for the Digital Marketing and Digital Transformation Unit of Thales, a global leader investing in digital and deep technology innovations to make the world safer, greener, and more inclusive. Hamilton is a senior lecturer at INSEAD, HEC Paris, and EDHEC Business School. He also actively participates in driving the advancement of digital technologies for positive change as a mentor at the MIT Priscilla King Gray Center. And he also serves as the president of the Digital Transformation Club of INSEAD's Alumni Association France. So to open up the session, let me start by asking Martin, what is it actually that we mean when we're talking about transparency in AI? One way that you could parse it is to talk about transparency in the data and in the model, in the source code, and explainability in the AI system's decision. So yeah, could you maybe talk about these different components?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation and for organizing this super interesting session. So why are we talking about transparency? I think it's really about trust, right? It's really, there is a big problem that current models, they really don't have all the trustworthiness that we would like to have. I mean, do we really trust ChatGPT for what kind of decisions, right? For maybe a small decision, yes, but maybe to get your medical treatment, do you trust it or not, right? So we have a fundamental question there. And the problem is that many of the state-of-the-art models now are behind closed doors, right? So they are developed by large companies. It's their intellectual property. So we do not have the ability to inspect these models, to completely understand these models and study them, study their limitations and capabilities. So that's why I think it's really important to also have open models, right? This is a requirement for so many things to be able to better understand these models. So what should we do? How do we achieve that, right? So it's not that every model needs to be completely open, right? There is always room for some proprietary models as well. It depends on the use case you do, right? So some use cases are less sensitive and some are more sensitive. As one example I want to give is that at EPFL, we worked on medical language models, and obviously that's a high-risk application. And with students in the lab, we developed a medical model which is called Meditron, which you can download. And the nice thing about it is completely open, right? It's not the best model, but it's the best model in the open source world. And there's only a small gap between the quality that we achieve with having completely open data and a completely open model, and also all the code is open. So I think this is important, right? And also the evaluations can be publicly shared and are open. So this is important to judge the gap between the closed source language models, which is still slightly better, and what is possible in the fully transparent world. I think it's also important for other high-risk use cases, like if you think about language models which could have influence on society, to make sure there is a democratic interaction with how these models should be deployed, right, and to be able to deploy them in a safe way. A requirement for that is to have transparent models. And by that, I mean, it has to be fully transparent for the whole pipeline, which means what data went in. So how does this data collected? Do we agree as a society that this data should be in the training data, or no, that this is harmful data, it should not be in the training data? So this would be so nice to have more transparency on also this training data. And even currently open models do not have that. Then the model has to be open, and also the evaluation of NUM. So it's an entire pipeline from the beginning to the final use case of these models. And yeah, I think there is much to do, but I think the academic community has an important role there to play as well. And for example, I also want to mention the Swiss AI initiative, which is a nice initiative which goes exactly in that direction, where we want to, again, maybe we'll not be able to do the very best model, but we need to, as the open community, also have transparent models to better understand them, to finally achieve safe deployments, and hopefully also develop better understanding is also a requirement for making these models finally explainable, which we are far from at the moment, right? So, but without transparency, it's going to be hard to do. So, explainability is hard, explainability is hard. Therefore, our only hope is to have transparent models to then also work towards that. So,
okay. You mentioned so many things that we need to unpack, but let me, it's great, lots of fodder for conversation. But let me then now pivot to Hamilton, who's in the private sector. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that. Like, transparency is written into the EU AI Act, as it is to a limited extent in GDPR's right to explanation. So, compliance is very much on the agenda for lots of companies. What or how will or should companies react to these regulations when full compliance is not even technically possible?
Yeah, so thank you very much for having me and for that session. I think how companies should react, I mean, basically when we talked about regulation, it's always also a kind of an opportunity to take a step back and say, oh, there will be constraints, so how we deal with this. At least might be a kind of a first impression. As always, or as often, when it comes to regulation, there is also great opportunity for innovation. As we know, right? You put pressure or you put constraints somewhere, and this is the recipe for having great innovation. So to me, first, it is very much, let's say, at stake, right? To take the opportunity of this new regulation, the EU AI Act, to figuring out new ways of thinking in the way we develop AI, but also, of course, in the way we deploy it. Just to name a few steps, right, which are not some kind of a secret bullet, but few steps that we, actually in Thales looking at, right? First, there will be a kind of a, let's say, assessment to make, right? We have AI models going on, and we need to, let's say, understand what kind of a, let's say, bucket is to be considered when it comes to complexity. If I'm, let's say, imagine a kind of a, let's say, a y-axis, right? And when it comes to risk, if I imagine also a kind of an x-axis, right? And so, of course, we will take care about making sure that we do, let's say, comply with as many, let's say, mandates that is, let's say, exposed and proposed by the EU AI Act when it comes to all the AI models that falls in the upper right of that quadrant, right? Complexity and risk. So that's number one. Because we are, let's say, of course, addressing a market where the critical chain, right, that we, let's say, taking care of is very much at stake when it comes to making decisions. For example, let's say in the plane, when we are, let's say, providing some equipment for planes, I mean, of course, life is at stake. So when it comes to risk, the point is very much about how much do I, let's say, evaluate the, let's say, life alteration of the decision that is taken by AI or that influenced by AI. How much it is life alteration, right? There is also another point to, let's say, also, reflect on, also as a company, right? What is very much considered as an acceptable risk, morally speaking, right? And this is also a very much, let's say, important question to be, let's say, taken into account in the evaluation. So when I'm saying this, all AI models are not equals. So they are, you have, and let's say the goal is not absolutely to, let's say, go for the best one because it doesn't make sense. Depending on the use case, of course, you want to make sure that you develop the right level of complexity for the AI models to be transparent, to be explainable. Everybody understands that the more it's complex, the less it is going to be easy to be transparent and to be explainable. But for specific use case, you need to have that complexity, right? So let's, not be naive. At the moment of your, let's say, driving, developing, and deploying such models, the EU AI Act will very much be at stake for you as a company to consider and to figuring out how you comply with. But this is not the only point to take into account, because when we talked about regulation, and this is the last point I want to emphasize, when we talked about regulation, we somehow intend to, let's say, embrace all the different, let's say, elements that are part of that regulation as a kind of a fixed pie, okay? But it is absolutely not a fixed pie. First, because regulation evolves. Second, because there is jurisprudence to be taken into account. And last, because beyond regulation, there is what is acceptable for society, right? And companies will be challenged not only by regulation, but by society itself, right? In terms of what is morally acceptable, as I was saying. So it is a kind of a moving target for companies to address, right? And so this is why assessment will be key. This is why making sure that we prioritize the right way will be key, because of course we can guess that investing to be compliant in some AI models that are very complex and very high risk will, let's say, require a certain level of investment that will not be exactly the same in terms of, let's say, amount, right? For AI models that are less complex and less risky. It will also require for companies to maybe also invest in some kind of a compliance enablement tools, right? Some exist today, and I think that, we can foresee more and more, let's say, compliance enablement tools to deploy and to evolve and to, let's say, help companies to get compliant with all those regulations. And I think it will be also, because I was thinking about, I was telling about the opportunities that the regulation brings for companies to innovate. I think this is also going to be an opportunity for making transparency and explainability as a kind of services, right? Delivering a kind of a value proposition where explainability and transparency will be very much, something that you deliver to your user or to your customers. I mean, let's imagine, for example, a kind of a company that develop a specific interface, very visual, So they get the opportunity, I mean, they get the service for their user and customers to see what the AI is doing, right? In many aspects, we can imagine some kind of thing like this. And you can monetize that, right? So again, this is something, I mean, we are at the very beginning of it. For sure, the regulation that is today will not be absolutely let's say, the one that we will, let's say, deal with tomorrow. So we are at the very beginning of it. I think that for us as a company, we need to take advantage of that as very much an opportunity to innovate, to think about AI differently, and take into account our responsibility as a stakeholder of society.
Thanks. Speaking of society, Laura, you have talked about aligning AI, going beyond transparency, and aligning AI with humanist values and fundamental rights. What exactly does that mean? And who's responsible for making that happen?
Okay, thanks for having me. I don't really love the idea to monetize transparency. I'm like, okay, but transparency needs to be here with AI for the moment, and we don't have to monetize. We need to have that like the beginning of AI. So today, when we speak about ethic and AI, ethic is a big word and we really don't know what it means. So perhaps we need to go just beyond that and say, okay, how can AI don't harm? How can AI be aligned to the value humanist to the fundamental rights? And perhaps it's the beginning of all thinking about a new AI. You can be a company, you can be a company who work in health or so, but the first step is how can we do AI do not harm? How can we do AI align by the human value? And I think it's really the first step. And there is a point in transparency, because now we know we don't be able to understand all of AI. We need to have open source, and in the open source there is two schools, like no open source because it's too much danger, and the other, okay, if it's so dangerous AI, we need to have open source to be able to understand it, to be able to have all the community to understand and to work to the AI. So we need to keep in mind too what sort of target we put, like human, if we don't be able to have transparency in sort of AI. There is a very interesting example with the mental health issue. You know, there is a therapy with electroshock to help for resistant depress, and we really don't know why it's work, but it's work, and we accept that because it's work. Okay, so we need to think about like humanity, like society, where we be okay to put the target, what we can accept for AI we don't understand, and how we can work about to find more transparency. We need to have more research, but one thing I think it's we don't need like society to pay for have transparency. Transparency needs to be the first step for AI.
Okay, so let's, I guess, take a step back and maybe, Martin, since you already talked about the importance of open source, most of us already use closed source technologies like Windows, probably everybody in this room, and we trust it. So, like, what's the problem with closed source, with non-transparent AI?
Yeah, I think it depends on the use case, right? But the crazy thing about this technology is just that it's so broad, right? It can be used for absolutely anything, right? It can be used for asking simple question, making a joke, right? But it can be used for super critical and risky things, right? So, and you mentioned some of them in the introduction, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why I'm thinking the level of transparency you need should be going with the level of risk we have in this use cases, and also the regulation for each of these use cases, right? It's the more risky ones. By the way, I also think that transparency actually helps to design the right regulations, because with that you actually see first what is possible, what is even achievable as the best, let's say, not biased model, right? So, I mean, so that then you can regulate, you need this, you're not allowed to be biased up to 90%, right? So just some number. How do we decide which number you put in the regulation, right? So I think we need to study this, and for this we need to have transparent models, right? To see how is it possible to reduce this risk, what risks are there. So I think that's very crucial, and it's kind of a unique time point that this technology starts to work. It's not the first time in history that a technology is used before it's understood, right? That's been very often the case, even with like electricity or so. It's been used much before that, but that doesn't mean that there needs to be public research. There needs to be a bit of transparency to then add this understanding to inform the regulation and make transparent decisions about how to mitigate the risk.
Well, okay, so you talk about monetization of transparency. You gave the example of, you talked about measuring or quantifying transparency, and you talked about, for example, electroshock therapy, and we don't know why it works, but it works, and so that's sort of taking a utilitarian approach of AI. I guess how do we square all these different ways of looking at AI and transparency in the different spheres? Research, civil society, private sector.
Yeah, if I can take this one, I think the different views that people will have with transparency is not necessarily to be opposed from one to another, right? I think what is very key is very much to understand, is it very important for the AI models to be transparent at a certain level because of the impact that these AI models may have in life and in society in general, okay? If the answer is like, yes, it will have a kind of a impact, right, in society and in life, definitely it is not an option for having transparency. And it has not to be monetized. It definitely become a right. And not just because regulation, because the society will, let's say, ask for that, okay? If I take the example of a car, right? I don't have a car, actually, but I guess so that many people around the room do have a car. Do we know exactly how it functions? I mean, if I, look at the motors, etc., do we know exactly how it functions? Do we expect to know exactly how it functions before buying it and before using it? Okay? Another example, if I'm going to see my doctor, right, and the doctor is using an AI, equipment or whatsoever to look at any disease that I may have, right? Do I want to make sure that this use of AI will very much be secure, transparent, accurate in terms of diagnosis? Of course, yes. At least me, yes. Right? So I think depending on what we are talking about, the level of transparency will, let's say, have different forms, different view. But definitely, what we will see and foresee more and more and more is that where life is not at stake, where there is, at a given moment of time, no, let's say, harmful impact for societies, right, in using some kind of AI models for specific use cases, we will see some companies, startups and big companies, finding some kind of opportunities, right, toward transparency and explainability, to invent new services that will also participate to educate people in terms of understanding what AIs mean and what is AI as a form of a way to explain it, right?
Perhaps one issue is I can be able to know what you have in your mind, okay, and it's okay. But if you discuss together and you explain me something, it's very important, if I'm not agree, to be able to, okay, just explain me step by step why you put this diagnosis if you are a medicine and a doctor. And perhaps it's a lot of question really, but perhaps we need to, we need to be able to work with AI who can explain the step to arrive to a decision, because we can have an AI who don't harm really, because it's not very important the decision she takes, but we really don't know never if we can't use that for another thing we don't think about. Yeah. So we need to have a challenge between what we are okay to use AI who don't be very transparent, and how to do to understand when it's necessary. And I think it's the really challenge today, and to improve civil society, to understand AI, to understand how it's works, to be able to have the good mindset to take AI and use it.
Well, I like where you guys are going with this, because we're getting at a little bit of some of the solutions, right? So you mentioned, for example, all the different components that go into a car. You're talking about asking questions step by step, Laura. And one thing that has been discussed is, for example, a lot of responsible software companies, they will maintain a software bill of materials, SBOM, to keep track of their software vulnerabilities. Would it make sense, maybe in the context of transparency in AI, to also for AI companies to have data bombs, for example? Maybe Martin and Hamilton could talk about that a bit. Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
Yeah, I'd be very much in support of that. Like it's really when there's a complex thing being built, you need to know what has gone into this cooking. So that's, I guess, what you're saying, and especially for the data, I think this is extremely important, right? So because now there is many reasons why this is not so done, right? Because it's part of the IP of the company, but also because of the question of copyright, right? Is it really allowed to train on copyrighted data? And if it's unclear, then many companies now do it anyway, but because we are not sure what has gone into the model, that's exactly, we have a lack of transparency, so we don't even have that information. So if we would know what went into the training data, that would be a huge benefit. Also to decide this a bit more democratically, like this is a toxic source of data. So what do you mean by that? Is it really, it's careful, right? It's going into political domain. So is this, how do we define this? And the only solution I see there is to really decide this democratically, like, this data should be used for training, this should not. And then the same thing also for the alignment of these models, right? So if we say these models should be aligned with our values, then that's not just a yes/no question that someone gives you this black box and you see. It's something you have to actively do, all of us together, to decide. Collect. It's about collecting data for this alignment to then, build it. And I think this is best done in the open, in transparent models, and also the measurement of then. You will always have failure models, right? We are far from perfect models. They are far from explainable. So then it's even more important that they are transparent and that the evaluations are transparent, and people will find new failure cases, right? But if the models are not even open, how do we find them? Yeah? So that's much better with open models. I'm a bit biased, but
Hamilton, I know I asked you to talk about it, but I see that there's some questions in the audience, so maybe we could go to that, and I'm sure you'll have some, be able to contribute. Actually, in the back over there, you.
Can I speak? I don't need a mic.
Oh, what? This thing? Oh my God! I had no idea. Sorry.
I think the discussion was very much about overarching about transparency, but can you help a layperson understand what are the different types of transparency? When talk transparency as an abstract, transparency of what? It's like, is it the data, how it computes? It's like, what are the dimensions of transparency that should be considered, and then in which case it will be different? But at least I, as a person who is not a specialist, I'm missing that part to understand, a little bit to separate a big problem in small parts.
Yes, definitely.
That would help. Thanks.
Let me maybe start with this. And I think your question is spot on, because it is by understanding that we can understand the challenge, right, in terms of what it means to be transparent with AI models. Let me start with a simple statement. We all want the AI models to be transparent. I mean, if it's, let's say, for granted, if it's possible, I mean, we want to go for it. What is, I think, very important to take into account is that AI models is not equaling AI models. There is different and several different AI models. So when we talked about AI, we feel like, putting everything like one size fits all. This is not the case. So let me take some very few examples of AI models where transparency means very different things, right? And when I say very different thing, I mean that it means very different expertise for companies, academics, etc., etc. So let's start very simple, right? If you take an AI model that is basically based on 3 decisions, okay? Very simple thing, 3 decisions. If you do this, it happens this. If you do that, it happens that, okay? Transparency will be easy. I need to have the decision tree, and then I understand the AI models and what kind of a decision will be taken in one way or another. Very simple. Okay, second example. If I take AI models that is roughly based on what we call the fuzzy based systems approach, okay? All right, so then it starts to becoming a bit more tricky, because the fuzzy-based systems approach when it comes to AI models, I mean, roughly means that, for example, now it's very hot, right? Okay. So the AI model will say, I will say to the AI models saying like, okay, if it's hot, then change the temperature and make it a bit more higher, okay? What does it mean hot? I put 100% in the room, in the same room, right? I ask them, what does it mean? It will mean different temperature from one people to another. What does it mean changing the temperatures because it's hot? I take the same 100% in the same room, and they will get many different answers. So if you have an AI model regulating that heat, right, in that specific aspect, for that specific fuzzy, let's say, related AI models, this will be a challenge to get explainability and to get transparency, because you need to have a grid where you specify for each and every cases of what do you mean by hot and what do you mean by increasing the heat, what kind of a degree you want, okay? So we understand that in that aspect, explainability and transparency will be a bit more complex than the other. Okay, I'm not talking about the GPT-3 and 4 and the likes, right? Which are very much based on what we call the deep learning neural networks. We are in the spectrum of what is the highest complexity of AI models. Here's, if I continue on the analogy of the temperatures, right? These AI models will be like, okay, I'm going to take many parameters, not only the heat of the room, but, for example, who is in the room, where they came from, what has been their preferences so far, etc., etc. So many patterns, right? I'm taking all of this into account. And the learning of that AI models based on what has been supervised, but also based on what has not been supervised, which is the magic of the thing because it's learned by itself, make it even more tricky to understand how it is going to come up with a decision to increase 2 degrees in this room. It is not impossible, but it is, I would say, it goes with a bit more of unpredictability than the 2 other models, right? So this is why this is important to understand that I have a decision to take. What kind of AI models do I need and do I want to deploy and to develop? Is it complex, very complex, less, etc.? Very first decision. And then based on the use case that I'm going to, let's say, apply with it, what are the impact in society? What is the impact when it comes to life? Because the more it is impactful for society and for life, and the more I need to make everything possible for transparency to be for granted in that AI models.
You go ahead. Yes.
Martin, you
Yeah,
have
no,
a
yeah,
better explanation for like me.
Well, I want Martin to talk maybe about the technical side of it, and then you can maybe also talk in the last few minutes also about like the ethical considerations as one of the ingredients for transparent AI. So.
Yeah, that's the much more important point, actually. I'm looking forward to your point on that. Just to add on the what does it mean transparency? So I also think for me it's also about reproducibility, right? So if someone sells you an AI model, how do you know it's transparent, right? So for me, it's if they give you the whole recipe, right? What went into it, so that you could actually, hypothetically, you could achieve exactly the same model. You have the entire code, you have all the data that was used, and all of that, so that we can really verify that yes, this AI model has been obtained like that, and that data went in. So really like open source software. Yeah, but yeah, that does not answer the ethical question, but that's the more important part.
And maybe you can answer the ethical, considerations, for privacy, for rights. For fairness, justice.
There is a lot, and for me, the first issue is diversity in AI, but not only diversity of who program the AI, but diversity of who use AI, diversity of who choose what is an ethical or transparent AI, and the diversity and how we can spread the monetization of AI. So we need to have a step ahead about transparency is data, but where is the data, how the data is collected, is consentment, is not. Where is how the model work, and how can I be able, like a person, to really understand how this AI work and do not harm me or like that. And I think the issues now is to put diversity in AI in all the steps of that, in using, in doing, in how to decide and how to monetize that.
Great. Unfortunately, we only have 1 minute left, and I know there's so many more questions, but it's a really interesting topic with a lot of layers. So I guess in closing, I'll just ask one last question. Until we get to the point where we can say that AI is 100% transparent, are we just, how do we decide what level of transparency that we are okay with? Are we kind of like, are we at risk of conditioning ourselves to decisions being made in a black box? I'm thinking of kind of the way that we gave up privacy without even thinking about it when AI and social media and stuff like that came about a couple decades ago.
For me, the problem with AI is we begin to discuss with the AI and we forgot that there is an AI, and we give trust because when we discuss with my phone, I give a nickname and so. And when we forgot that there is an AI, we forgot the limit of transparency, we forgot the limit of, I give so much private thing of me. So we need to work with that.
Okay.
Yeah, just maybe to complement a little point on that, I think we all have responsibilities, right, as individuals and as societies, to make sure that the times that is needed and the times that we take to question ourselves, to, let's say, be willing to understand, right? It is going to be protected, right? It is something that is, let's say, we want to avoid that behavior, that human behaviors, that not to be, let's say, a kind of in a kind of a danger of extinction in a way, right? So I think this is very much important also to understand that AI is not just about AI, it is also about our own behavior as human, as society. And as you were saying, right, just as with the social media and the social networks, we, in a way, tacitly, implicitly give away a little bit of what is dear to our heart in terms of privacy. We do so, we did so, right? At different level, right, of scale, but we did so. I think this is very much at stake to make sure that when it comes to AI, we do not neglect the human agency when it comes to AI decision making.
Great. Thank you for your thoughts. If you have questions, please track them down, and I'm sure they'd be happy to answer all your questions. Thanks, everybody, for coming.